I want to get into a little basketball, and going into this game, my friend Eric Martini, he's so adamant about this Brooklyn Nets team that they're much better than they were after they traded James Harden. He keeps talking about Steph Curry. This isn't Steph Curry, okay? He is a better defender. He's also a better defender than James Harden, who isn't better than James Harden. But the fact is, Seth Curry isn't James Harden. Ben Simmons isn't James Harden. Kevin Durant obviously is better, and Kyrie Irving is better. And even this game that just passed, this is one game. Now, did James Harden play well? James Harden has seemed to, when it comes to the big game, fallen apart. Now, is this the same James Harden that's going to go into the playoffs with this 76ers team? And if he plays like that, 76ers are going to go one and done. James Harden is just have to be mediocre and efficient. Give them 20 to 22 points and let Embiid take over the game and let him be the guy that is the superstar. And this team could win. I don't know why James Harden in the big game, he can't play at the top level. And when he plays the crappy teams or he plays the Knicks, he scores 40 or 50 points. James Harden's just under pressure. He's not the type of player. Now, Kevin Durant has been. Even Kyrie Irving has been a very good playoff player. He's been the guy, the go-to guy with the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron was there. I know a lot of people are looking at this game and saying there's no way in hell the 76ers could beat the Brooklyn Nets. It is a regular season game. There's a lot of basketball left. And before the playoffs, I don't know if they're even going to meet each other until either the second or even the Eastern Conference Championship. To sit here and say that the 76ers can't beat the Brooklyn Nets in a 7-game series is ridiculous.
The Nets are going to have trouble if they end up being a play-in team. If there's extra wear and tear for the Nets, it's going to be very hard. I don't know if I still trust either team's playoff identity because James Harden, he gets rattled and then he tries to shoot himself out of games, which should shoot teams out of games too. And even Embiid has been streaky throughout his career in the playoffs. Now, the Sixers do have a little more depth than they did in previous years too, where you have guys like Tyrese Maxey and Furkan Korkmaz, Shake Milton guys off the bench that have played well. Doc Rivers is obviously a better coach than Brett Brown, but still, Doc Rivers has had his playoff woes too with the Clippers. So I still don't know if I trust either one of them, but if it comes to a playoff series, if the Nets are still a playoff team, it probably would end up being the Sixers I would trust. I still don't trust either one of them. I would favor Miami or Milwaukee a little more than those two teams, but yeah, they could definitely still beat the Nets.
I believe that James Harden's going to go back into the next game, and he's going to have a better appearance. Now, this team is going to have to play a little bit better. I still think the 76ers have the better team, the more depth, especially with some of the different players that they have, but only time will tell, and the best Kevin Durant is better than any player on both rosters. So Kevin Durant, to me, when he's 100% healthy, he's a top 3 player, top 2 player in the NBA, and before he got hurt, he was the MVP. As far as the Knicks are concerned, well, they play so well in the first 3 quarters of every single game. Mostly every single game, they're competitive all the way into the fourth quarter. You have guys like Julius Randle, certain other players. I mean, not RJ, and I'm not going to throw RJ Barrett under the bus because RJ has grown. He really has grown this year as a good player. And I think, another year, 2 years under his belt, I think he's going to be a special player. But Julius Randle has been nothing but a cancer to this team. This team has been horrendous. They have to figure out what they're doing with Julius Randle in the offseason because he does not fit this roster. And I've said this before they gave him the contract. I know they gave him a working contract. How could the Knicks sit in the offseason saying that Julius Randle is the guy? He's the guy that makes sense. He's the guy that's going to help the Knicks get to that next essence of where they should be, and that's an Eastern Conference championship. And Tom Thibodeau, as much as I love Tom, I don't know if he's the guy. They've fallen apart this year. I think he's worn them out. And I just think some of the players just don't fit the culture of what the young players don't fit his culture of the way he coaches. So I think the Knicks have a lot of decisions to make in the offseason. I know Tom Thibodeau was coach of the year last year. To fall off the way they did from a 4th seed all the way to a 12th or 13th seed in the Eastern Conference and not make the playoffs, and they went from a top 5 defense to 21st in defense all around the league. You fall 15 spots. With practically the same team, it makes no sense. You can't explain why this has happened.
Well, when you have bad, inefficient offense, it creates tired defense or transition plays that lead to fast break. It makes it harder for you to play defense. So same thing in football. If your defense is on the field forever, you're going to look worse even if you have talent on your defense, which the Knicks do. It's not like the Knicks are an untalented defensive team. So when your offenses look bad and guys shoot inefficiently like they have been doing this year, especially the veteran players, then it's going to make it hard for them to grow. And again, it looks kind of fluky the way they made the 4 seed last year. Obviously, it was kind of surprising. But still, to regress to a 12 and probably not going to make the playoffs at all is definitely surprising considering that the talent that they added. It's just surprising that these adjustments were never made by what is thought of to be not only not only a good head coach in Tom Thibodeau, a good coaching staff as a whole too. When you look at some of those assistants that did well for those young players last year, and for the growth of guys like R.J. Barrett. So it's definitely surprising as a whole. I think they got to commit to the young players now, at least build a foundation like a middle-tier team. The Knicks kind of make themselves stuck where they have to be the flashy team just because they're in New York, and sometimes teams end up falling for that trap a lot of the time. You look at a team like the Islanders, the way they rebuilt. I know they're down this year, but still, the way they rebuilt is they were able to get good contracts, build the team with good coaching, and a great GM in Lou Lamoriello, and they didn't, except for the bad contracts they still have on the team, they didn't overpay anybody else after that. The Knicks maybe have to go with that kind of mold to try to make that kind of thing work too, because overspending doesn't always work. Like you were saying with the Mets, like you were saying with the Yankees of the past, and the teams like the Rangers over the years too. Just because you're in New York doesn't mean you have to look flashy. Look at the Nets; they're probably going to lose this big three as a result now too, and then 10 years later.
You just mentioned hockey, and it's not crazy to say that the Islanders could make a run and try to sneak into the playoffs, but I think they're just too far behind. 22 games left behind Boston, I think, is the final position.
Washington right now.
What do they have? How many points?
74 points, and the Islanders have 54. So
I mean, they're 20.
It's highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely the Islanders are making the playoffs. Okay, they can win out all their games, and what the Islanders need to do is they have to decide what they're doing in the offseason, how they're going to bring in that next superstar. They're going to have a lot of money this offseason. Mm-hmm. They are. They're going to be able to bring in a big guy, a big player to play with Barzal. That's something they've been lacking all season long. And COVID-19 definitely affected the Islanders. Not having a home game throughout the first month of the season or first 6 weeks of the season has affected the Islanders. So, listen, I know a lot of Islander fans are going to take a step back and look. They're upset that the Rangers are going to make it and the Islanders are going to make it. The last 2 years, the Islanders have been an efficient team and have been one of the best teams in the league. And a lot of people picked the Islanders to win the Stanley Cup this year. The Islanders just need to take a step back. They have still a good roster of players that will be ready for next year. A lot of them are under contract still. What they need to do at the trade deadline, they're going to have to decide on what how this works. Do they trade Josh Bailey, who's had a terrible season? Okay, he has 6 goals this season. Yeah. They need to get rid of certain pieces. Clutterbuck, if they're not bringing him back, trade him. Maybe trade him now, and if you want to bring him back in the offseason for a cheaper price, if he wants to come back, do that. But there are pieces. Paul Murray, who's not played well for the Islanders, he's played better now that he's played with Parisi and and played with Barzal. I mean, I was very surprised that it's taken the coaching staff and Barry Trotz a time to figure out, hey, you know what, these rosters, these lines aren't working. Let's shift them. As soon as they did that, they're scoring more goals and they're winning more games. So I think this team is lacking offense. They need to find offense. And I think that in the offseason, it's not just one player they should bring in. They should bring in a superstar player to play with Barzal and bring in another efficient offensive player where you can get somewhere, at a good cost price for $5 or $6 million and a year, and then and now solidify this team offensively. Something they've been lacking all year. Sorokin has been sensational. Yes. He really has been. There's nothing you could say about Sorokin. I know everybody keeps talking about how great Shesterkin. When your whole team is playing well, the goalie's going to play well, and he's got. Right now, the Rangers are anything they do is turned to gold, and that has a lot to do with the new coaching. And teams don't know how they play. Next year is going to be different. The Rangers are going to have more pressure on them because teams are going to expect them to be good. And if they don't show up next year, teams like the Islanders are going to be better next year. Philadelphia, which I believe will be better next year with some of the young talent that they have in their farm system. There's a lot of teams that could absolutely grow to be back. On the top of the Eastern Conference. So, and the Rangers have been sensational. There's nothing they have done wrong this year. Their goaltender has a very good chance of winning the Vezina Trophy this year. What their young defenseman is doing right now, and he's been unbelievable. And right now he has a chance to win a back-to-back Norris trophies, and I don't think there's a Ranger that's ever done that before. So, I mean, Fox has been sensational, and say whatever you want. John Davidson gave him a gift before he left.
Yes.
He got him a defenseman that's become a superstar defenseman, one of the best, more talented defensemen in the NHL right now.
You mentioned Clutterbuck. I think that's the one that's been rumored the most a lot recently. Nashville's expressed interest. Colorado, who just traded for Devon Taves last offseason, they've expressed interest. And also the Florida Panthers have expressed interest. 3 teams that are looking to get some more toughness on that team and are willing to take on that kind of money. And then the other one,
only 1 year left on his contract.
Right, which is not bad. And I think that scenario, what you said, is going to happen. I feel like it could happen too, where they get traded and he comes back for
I could see
$1 million or something like that, something cheap. And then the other one too is Semyon Varlamov. Because Sorokin's played so well, he's locked in as the starter. Varlamov's been dealing with a lot of
teams have been interested.
Yeah. A lot of teams have been interested in them. Edmonton's a fringe team that could go after them. They're right now the first team out in the Western Conference, so that's definitely an option. We've heard the Penguins have had interest in goalie. I was talking about Vegas last week. Robin Lehner, after I said he came back, he just got hurt again, so now they might be back in the market for a goaltender too. The Kings, another team that could be interesting to look at a goalie too, because Jonathan Quick's been in and out with injuries as well. If they feel like they can contend, it could definitely be an option for them too.
I expect more too. I don't expect two players in the Islanders trade. I could see Lou Lamoriello trying to shed contracts, and if not shed, bring in another player. Maybe they can get a trade where they could bring in an offensive player that fits for next year under contract.
Right.
So
even a team like Nashville too, even though Saros is a very good goalie, could use a better backup too that could help out, so they don't wear him out like they wore out Pecorine at certain points in his career too. So there's going to be options of teams that have that kind of money to make that kind of thing work. As far as the Rangers are concerned, one of the trade targets I wanted for them was Joe Pavelski. He just got extended by Dallas, so it seems unlikely they'll trade him unless they extend him to trade him. But still, it seems unlikely. So the team I'm looking at to trade with is possibly with Winnipeg. A lot of their players have been dangled. Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Andrew Kopp's another guy that's a good face-off guy. Too. Yeah, there's a lot of guys.
I don't think they're going to get him.
I don't think. Again, I'm just getting targets.
He's
for the
a guy
Rangers.
that the Islanders should definitely look at.
Yeah,
too.
there's definitely some targets because the Rangers definitely need center depth in the worst way. Still bad face-off team. That's going to be an issue that they're going to look at. And Winnipeg has all that depth. They need defense. They need young players because there are a lot of bad contracts right now.
I heard Capo Caco could be available to trade.
And I also heard, and this is the main piece that they're looking to trade, is Vitaly Kravtsov, who's their first-round pick 3 years ago, and he hasn't played at all for the Rangers yet. So that's going to probably be the main one they're looking at. But yes, I would not rule out Kako either as being a piece of that kind of trade, especially a team like Winnipeg who could use that kind of player as well. If the Rangers want to go after some center depth too, and there's going to be obviously some teams, other teams in the Western Conference too, Anaheim, San Jose, that have a lot of veterans on their roster they could trade.